The click of the handcuffs was the loudest sound 17-year-old Marcus Vance had ever heard. Louder than the roar of the 777 jet engine just outside the window. Louder than the murmurs of the crowd that had gathered to watch the spectacle at gate C-26. In the sterile, impersonal environment of JFK International Airport, a place of hellos and goodbyes, he was being publicly shamed for a crime he didn't understand, let alone commit. He was just a boy with a sketchbook and a first-class ticket to London. But to the woman staring at him with cold triumph, he was a threat. She had no idea she wasn't just cuffing a teenager. She was cuffing her own career, her future, and the pristine reputation of the very airline she swore to protect. She had no idea whose son she had just shackled. The Aura Airlines first-class lounge at John F. Kennedy International Airport was an oasis of curated calm. Soft jazz piano trickled from hidden speakers. The air smelled of expensive espresso and a faint, clean hint of lemon. And the low hum of conversation was the sound of money and influence taking a brief pause. 17-year-old Marcus Vance felt distinctly out of place, as he always did in these environments. He was tucked into a plush leather armchair in a far corner, his lanky frame folded into itself. A worn charcoal gray hoodie was pulled up over his head, not as an act of defiance, but as a shield. Earbuds were nestled in his ears, playing a lo-fi hip-hop beat that helped him focus. On the low marble table in front of him, a pristine moleskin sketchbook lay open. His pencil, a well-worn Blackwing 602, moved with a life of its own across the page. He wasn't drawing the polished businessmen tapping on their laptops or the elegant women sipping champagne. He was drawing the janitor, an older man with tired eyes and a kind slump to his shoulders, who was meticulously polishing a brass railing near the entrance. Marcus captured the grace in the man's repetitive motion, the story etched in the lines on his face. He found more truth in that than in all the gleaming chrome and feigned smiles of the lounge. Marcus was on his way to London for a summer arts program at the prestigious Slade School of Fine Art, a life-changing opportunity he had earned on his own merit. His father, James Vance, had wanted to send the private jet, but Marcus had insisted on flying commercial. He hated the fuss. He just wanted to be a normal kid, to blend in, to observe the world without the world observing him back. The first-class ticket was his father's one non-negotiable compromise. For safety, James had said, his voice distant over the phone from a conference in Singapore. For Marcus, it was just an uncomfortable seat in a fancier part of the plane. At 3:15 p.m., the boarding announcement for Aura Flight 104 to London, Heathrow echoed softly through the lounge. Marcus carefully placed his pencil in the spiral of his sketchbook, closed it, and slipped it into his worn leather backpack. He slung the bag over one shoulder, took one last gulp of his lukewarm water, and headed toward the gate. Gate C-26 was already a controlled chaos of passengers lining up in their respective zones. Marcus, holding his first-class boarding pass, navigated his way to the priority lane. The agent scanning the tickets was a woman in her late 40s named Karen Miller. Her name tag was pinned perfectly on her crisp Aura uniform. She had a severe blonde bob that looked like it had been sculpted from granite and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. For 20 years, Karen had worked this gate. She had seen it all and had developed a sixth sense, or so she believed, for trouble. She prided herself on being Aura's vigilant gatekeeper. As Marcus approached, Karen's professionally pleasant expression tightened. Her eyes did a quick, dismissive sweep. The expensive noise-canceling headphones, the worn backpack, the non-designer hoodie, and the color of his skin. Her internal calculus produced an immediate, undeniable result. Mismatch. This kid didn't belong here. He was probably using a stolen credit card or a fraudulent ticket. She'd seen it before. Young men who looked just like him, trying to game the system. "Boarding pass and passport," she said, her voice clipped, devoid of the warmth she had offered the passenger just before him. Marcus pulled his earbuds out, the music fading into a tinny whisper. "Sorry, your boarding pass and your passport. Now please, you're holding up the line." Marcus blinked, a little taken aback by her tone. He handed them over. She snatched them from his hand, her painted nails clicking against the passport cover. She scanned the boarding pass. Beep. First class. Seat 2A. She looked at the passport. Marcus Vance? Then she looked back up at him, her eyes narrowing with suspicion. Is this your ticket, sir? She asked, the word sir weaponized with condescension. Yes, ma'am, Marcus replied, his voice quiet. He was used to being questioned, to being looked at twice in expensive stores or nice neighborhoods. It was a familiar, wearying dance. He just wanted to get on the plane. And how did you purchase this ticket? Karen pressed, her voice loud enough for those nearby to turn and listen. A flush of heat crept up Marcus's neck. My father bought it. Your father, she repeated slowly, as if the concept was absurd. And what is your father's name? James Vance, Marcus said, the name feeling foreign and loud in his own mouth. He hated having to use it, to pull it out like a shield or a key. It always changed the dynamic, and never for the better. Karen's lips curled into a smirk of disbelief. She tapped a few keys on her computer, her movements sharp and aggressive. I don't see a James Vance associated with this booking other than as a frequent flyer account number. It was booked with a corporate Amex. Right. That's his company card, Marcus explained, trying to keep his voice steady. He could feel the eyes of the other passengers on him now. He instinctively pulled the strings of his hoodie tighter. His company card, Karen scoffed. She looked him up and down again, her gaze lingering on his worn sneakers. Look, son, I don't have time for games. This is a first-class ticket. It costs over $10,000. You're going to have to come with me. We have a few questions for you. Questions? About what? My flight is boarding. Panic began to prickle at the edges of his composure. I haven't done anything wrong. That's what they all say, Karen said, a grim satisfaction in her voice. She picked up the phone at her station and spoke into it in a low, urgent tone. This is Karen Miller at C26. I have a possible code 4 credit card fraud. Suspect is a black male, late teens, attempting to board Flight 1004 with a fraudulent first-class ticket. Yes, I need Port Authority here. Now. Marcus's blood ran cold. Code 4? Suspect? The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The murmurs from the line grew louder. Phones were being discreetly raised. He wasn't a passenger anymore. He was a spectacle. He was a threat. And Karen Miller, the vigilant gatekeeper of Airlines, watched him with the unwavering conviction of someone who was sure she had just saved the day. The 2 Port Authority Police Department officers arrived in under 3 minutes, but to Marcus, it felt like an eternity. In that time, he stood frozen in a bubble of silent humiliation. The boarding process had halted. Everyone was staring. He could hear snippets of conversation, whispered judgments weaving a narrative around him before he could speak a single word of his own. Can't believe the nerve. Dressed like that? Good thing she caught him. Each phrase was a small stone cast in his direction. Karen Miller stood with her arms crossed, a general directing her troops. When Officers Davies and Johnson approached, she launched into her report with practiced efficiency, painting a picture of a cunning young criminal. He was trying to use this, she said, holding up Marcus's boarding pass as if it were contaminated. First class, seat 2A. The story kept changing. First his father bought it, then it was a company card. He's evasive. His appearance is completely inconsistent with the profile of our first-class clientele. I'm certain the card used to purchase this ticket is stolen. Officer Davies, a burly man with a thick mustache and weary eyes, turned his gaze on Marcus. It was not a look of inquiry, but of confirmation. He saw what Karen had told him to see, a young black man in a hoodie where he shouldn't be. Son, what's your name? Davies asked, his hand resting casually on the butt of his service weapon. Marcus Vance. His voice was barely a whisper. His throat felt like it was closing up. And you're telling this airline agent that your father bought this ticket? Yes, sir, he did. And you have no proof of that? No confirmation email on your phone? No way to verify this purchase? Officer Johnson, younger and more rigid, interjected. I can call him, Marcus offered, his hand trembling as he reached for his pocket. No, you don't, Davies said, taking a half step forward, his posture immediately more intimidating. Don't reach into your pockets. Keep your hands where I can see them. Marcus's hand froze. He raised both his hands slowly, palms open, a gesture of surrender that he hated but knew was necessary. My phone is in my pocket. I can call my dad. His name is James Vance. He can clear all of this up in 2 seconds. Karen let out a short, derisive laugh. Oh, I'm sure he can. We're not stupid, kid. We run into this scam all the time. You think dropping a common name is going to get you out of this? The absurdity of the situation was beginning to curdle into a terrifying reality. They didn't believe him. To them, his very existence in this space was a lie. The truth he was offering was being treated as the most outlandish fiction. Ma'am, with all due respect, Marcus said, trying to hold on to the last shreds of his composure. My father is a frequent flyer with Aura. He has millions of miles. You can look him up. James Vance. James. Karen tapped her keyboard again with theatrical annoyance. She scrolled for a moment, then her face hardened. There are over 50 James Vances in our system, and I'm not about to call all of them for you. You've been flagged for suspicious activity. You're being denied boarding. Denied boarding? My program starts in 2 days. I have to be on this flight. The desperation in his voice made him sound younger, more vulnerable, which only seemed to cement their certainty of his guilt. As this was unfolding, the flight's captain, a sharp, no-nonsense woman in her 50s named Eva Rostova, emerged from the jet bridge. She had been notified of a delay at the gate and had come to see what the holdup was. She took in the scene. Her gate agent puffed up with authority, 2 Port Authority officers flanking a terrified-looking teenager, and a plane full of first-class passengers waiting to board. Karen, what in God's name is going on? Captain Rostova's voice cut through the tension with an accent that was a mix of Eastern European steel and New York directness. We have a schedule to keep. Karen straightened up, eager to present her catch to a higher authority. Captain, my apologies for the delay. I identified a security risk. This individual was attempting to board with a fraudulent ticket. We're handling it. Captain Rostova's gaze fell on Marcus. She saw the boy, not the security risk. She saw the expensive headphones, yes, but also the high-quality art supplies peeking out of his backpack. She saw the fear in his eyes, not malice. Fraudulent how? The captain asked, her eyes still on Marcus. The ticket was purchased with a high-limit corporate card, but he can't verify his identity or his relation to the cardholder. His story's inconsistent, Karen recited. Captain Rostova stepped closer to Marcus, ignoring Karen and the officers for a moment. She addressed him directly, her voice firm but not unkind. What's your name, son? Marcus Vance, ma'am. And you're supposed to be in seat 2A? Yes, ma'am. She looked at his boarding pass, then back at his face. She turned to Karen. Did you ask him for his ID? He showed me his passport, Karen said defensively. It matches the name, but that doesn't mean anything. Passports can be fake. Captain Rostova's eyebrow shot up. A fake American passport? To get through TSA and to my gate? Are you serious, Karen? Did you even bother to try and verify the payment? The system flagged it as suspicious, Karen insisted, her voice rising in pitch. She was feeling her authority being challenged, and she didn't like it. She felt the need to reassert control, to prove she had been right. She turned to Officer Davies. He's becoming agitated, she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. He was reaching into his pockets before. I think for the safety of the other passengers, he needs to be restrained and removed from the gate area. The suggestion hung in the air, a drop of poison. Officer Davies, who had been on the fence, was swayed by the airline agent's supposed expertise in escalating fear. It was her domain, after all. He nodded grimly. All right, son. That's enough, Davies said, his voice hardening. Turn around. Place your hands behind your back. Marcus's world stopped. What? Restrained? I haven't done anything. I'm just trying to get on a plane. You've caused a public disturbance, and you're a potential security threat. Officer Johnson chimed in, stepping to Marcus's other side. Do it now. This is insane, Marcus pleaded, looking past them to Captain Rostova, his last hope. Ma'am, please, just let me call my dad. But it was too late. Karen Miller had set the wheels in motion, and the machine of protocol and prejudice was now grinding forward, unstoppable. Officer Davies grabbed Marcus's arm. Marcus instinctively flinched away, a purely reflexive action of fear and disbelief. That was all the justification they needed. "He's resisting!" Karen shouted, sealing his fate. In an instant, Officer Davies twisted Marcus's arm behind his back. Officer Johnson moved in, and with a swift, practiced motion, they slammed him against the sterile wall of the terminal, right next to a vibrant Aura Airlines advertisement promising a world of comfort and care. The lie of it was so profound it was almost funny. A world of care, while the cold, unforgiving steel of handcuffs was being ratcheted tight around his wrists. The metallic click of the handcuffs locking into place was a sound of finality. It severed the last thread of hope Marcus had been clinging to. The cold steel bit into his wrists, a brutal contrast to the warmth of the terminal. The pressure was real, tangible, a physical manifestation of the nightmare he had fallen into. He was pushed to face the wall, his cheek pressed against the cool, smooth surface of the advertisement. In his peripheral vision, he could see the smiling face of a model sipping champagne in an Aura Airlines first-class seat. His seat. A collective gasp went through the crowd of onlookers. The discreet whispers turned into a low, horrified roar. Phones, which had been held cautiously, were now raised openly, their small red recording lights blinking like malevolent eyes. A young woman named Sarah, a student journalist on her way to study abroad, was already live streaming, her voice a shocked whisper narrating the scene. "Oh my God, they're handcuffing him. He's just a kid. He hasn't done anything." "Stop resisting, son," Officer Davies grunted, pushing his knee into the back of Marcus's thigh, even though Marcus was perfectly still, paralyzed by shock. "I'm not resisting," Marcus choked out, the words muffled against the wall. "I'm not." Karen Miller watched, her expression a mixture of vindication and grim duty. She had done it. She had neutralized the threat. She had protected her airline. In her mind, the image was one of order being restored. To everyone else, it was the image of a boy being publicly humiliated. Captain Ava Rostova stood aghast. "This is an outrage," she snapped, her voice cutting through the noise. "Officers, what are you doing? He's a passenger, not a criminal. He posed no physical threat." "Ma'am, with all due respect, this is a police matter now," Officer Johnson said curtly, not turning to look at her. "The airline representative reported a security risk, and he resisted our instructions." "He flinched because you grabbed him," Rostova retorted, stepping forward. "I am the captain of this aircraft. This is my flight, and that is my passenger. You will not treat him this way at my gate. I want this to stop right now." Her authority, usually absolute on her aircraft and its immediate vicinity, was being completely ignored. The officers were in their own world of procedure, fueled by Karen's accusations. "Ma'am, if you interfere, we'll have to detain you as well," Davies warned over his shoulder. Captain Rostova was momentarily silenced, not by the threat, but by the sheer, unyielding stupidity of the situation. She locked eyes with Karen. "You did this," she mouthed, her face a mask of fury. "You will answer for this." Karen, bolstered by the police presence, simply raised her chin in defiance. They pulled Marcus away from the wall. He stumbled, his legs unsteady. They began to march him back through the terminal, away from the gate, away from his flight to London, away from his future. He was now a perp being paraded through the airport for all to see. The humiliation was a physical pain, a fire spreading across his skin. He kept his eyes fixed on the floor, on the scuff marks on the polished tiles, trying to disconnect his mind from his body. He focused on the beat that was still faintly playing in his earbuds, a ghost of the peace he'd felt just 10 minutes ago. "Can I please make a phone call?" Marcus asked, his voice cracking. "It's my right. One phone call." Officer Davies hesitated for a second. The kid hadn't been formally arrested and charged yet, just detained. Technically, they were just taking him to a substation within the airport for questioning. But the public nature of it, the cuffs, the cameras, it was getting messy. A phone call might de-escalate things, or it might escalate them. "Fine," Davies grunted. "One call, make it quick. Who are you calling? Your lawyer." "I'm calling my dad," Marcus said, a quiet resolve hardening his voice. The fear was still there, a cold knot in his stomach, but something else was rising to meet it, a sliver of anger, a desperate need for the truth to finally break through this wall of prejudice. They led him to a small windowless office just off the main concourse. It smelled of stale coffee and disinfectant. They sat him in a hard plastic chair. Officer Johnson stood by the door, arms crossed, while Davies unlocked one of Marcus's cuffs, leaving the other attached to a metal ring on the table. "Give me the number," Davies said, holding out his own phone. He wasn't about to let Marcus use his. Marcus recited the number from memory. It was a private line, one he only used for emergencies. Davies dialed, his thick finger tapping the screen. He put the phone on speaker, a cruel smile playing on his lips. He and Karen, who had followed them, clearly expected to hear some bewildered parent who would have no idea what was going on. The phone rang twice. Then a deep, powerful voice answered, sharp and impatient. "This is Vance." There was no greeting, no preamble. Just the name, spoken with an authority that commanded attention. Yes," Officer Davies began, slightly thrown off. "My name is Officer Davies with the Port Authority PD at JFK. I have a minor in my custody here by the name of Marcus Vance. He says you're his father." There was a pause on the other end of the line, a silence so profound it seemed to suck the air out of the room. When the voice returned, it was several degrees colder, laced with something dangerous. "He is in your custody? Explain." "Well, sir, he was attempting to board an Airlines flight to London with what we believe to be a fraudulent first-class ticket." "Flight 104? The voice cut in, sharp as a razor. Yes, that's the one." "Seat 2A? Davies' eyes widened slightly. He glanced at Karen, who was starting to look uneasy. "Yes, sir, that's correct." Another terrible silence. Then the voice spoke again, slow and deliberate, each word a perfectly weighted stone dropped into a still pond. "Officer Davies, I am going to say this once, so I suggest you listen very carefully. My name is James Elliot Vance. I am the founder and chief executive officer of Airlines. The ticket your suspect is holding was purchased with my executive corporate card, the same card I use for all my family's travel. You are currently detaining my 17-year-old son. You have, according to the alert I just received from my executive assistant, placed him in handcuffs at my airline's gate, in front of my passengers and my crew." Karen Miller's face went completely white. The blood drained from her head so fast she swayed on her feet. Officer Davis's jaw went slack, the smug confidence evaporating from his face, replaced by a dawning, sickening horror. Officer Johnson visibly stiffened, his professional detachment shattering. The voice on the phone was no longer just cold. It was glacial. "You have approximately 60 seconds to take those handcuffs off my son. Then you will wait there. Do not move. Do not speak to him. Do not let him out of your sight. I am on my way. And I promise you, Officer Davies, by the time I am done, you will wish you had called in sick today." The line went dead. The silence that followed was heavier and more terrifying than the voice itself. Davies fumbled with the key, his hands shaking so badly he could barely fit it into the lock of the handcuffs. Karen Miller simply stared at Marcus, at the quiet boy in the hoodie, and saw not a suspect, but the ghost of her entire career. The click of the handcuffs being unlocked was a stark echo of the sound of them being fastened, but the meaning was worlds apart. One was a declaration of guilt, the other a panicked admission of a catastrophic mistake. Officer Davies practically ripped the cuff from Marcus's wrist, leaving a raw red mark. The officer's face, moments before a mask of bored authority, was now pale and slick with sweat. He avoided Marcus's eyes, fumbling with the handcuffs as if they were venomous snakes. "There's been a misunderstanding," Davies stammered, the words sounding hollow and absurd in the small, tense room. Karen Miller looked like she had seen a ghost. Her perfect, severe posture had crumbled. She leaned against the wall for support, her hand covering her mouth. Her mind was a frantic whirlwind, replaying every condescending word, every dismissive glance, every triumphant accusation she had hurled at the boy, who was, impossibly, the son of the man who owned the entire company, the man who signed her paychecks, the man whose face was on the cover of Forbes magazine last month with the headline, "The Titan of the Skies." Marcus said nothing. He rubbed his chafed wrist, the physical sting a dull anchor in a sea of emotional turmoil. He watched the two officers and the gate agent disintegrate into panic. Their power, so absolute and crushing just moments ago, had vanished. It had been a facade, a fragile shell built on a foundation of assumption and prejudice, and his father's name had been the hammer that shattered it. The realization brought him no joy, only a profound and weary sadness. "Do you want some water?" Officer Johnson asked, his voice suddenly solicitous, dripping with a desperate attempt at conciliation. Marcus just shook his head, looking down at the floor. Outside the small office, the news was beginning to ripple outwards with the speed of a shockwave. Captain Rostova, who had been arguing fiercely with a Port Authority supervisor just down the hall, saw a senior airline executive, the vice president of North American operations for Aura, sprinting toward the gate, his face ashen. He had clearly received a call. "Where is he? Where is Marcus Vance?" The VP, a man named Robert Paulson, demanded, his voice tight with panic. Captain Rostova pointed towards the office. "In there, with the two officers who assaulted him and the gate agent who started it all." Paulson's eyes widened at the word assaulted. He scrambled towards the office, nearly tripping over his own expensive loafers. Meanwhile, Sarah's live stream had exploded. The video of a calm, quiet black teen being aggressively handcuffed at an airline gate was already being shared by the thousands. Hashtags were forming organically. Turdi flying while black, Spannen justice for Marcus, Archon, Aura Airlines, shame. The name Marcus Vance was unknown, but the image was universally understood and condemned. The 10 minutes between the end of the phone call and the arrival of James Vance were the longest of Karen Miller's life. Every tick of the clock was a drumbeat of her impending doom. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the frantic buzz of Officer Davis's radio. They didn't dare speak to Marcus. He was no longer a suspect. He was a monument to their failure, a silent, breathing embodiment of the worst decision they had ever made. Then he arrived. James Vance didn't run into the terminal. He moved with a speed and purpose that seemed to bend the air around him. He was flanked by two stern-looking men in dark suits and Robert Paulson, the VP, who was babbling apologies that James ignored completely. James was tall, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit despite having just come from his car, and he radiated an aura of controlled volcanic fury. His eyes, the same intelligent, observant eyes as his son's, scanned the area until they found the office. He strode in without breaking stride. The two officers instinctively took a step back, as if from a physical force. James's eyes went straight to Marcus, who was still sitting in the chair, looking small and overwhelmed. He took in the red mark on his son's wrist, the haunted look in his eyes, and something inside him, a carefully controlled corporate composure, fractured permanently. He walked over to Marcus and knelt before him, placing a hand on his son's knee. He didn't say, "Are you okay?" because he knew, with a father's certainty, that he was not. "Marcus," he said, his voice now quiet, filled with a pain that no one else in the room was meant to hear. "I'm here. I'm so sorry." Marcus finally looked up at his father, and the dam of his composure broke. A single tear traced a path down his cheek. He just nodded, unable to speak. James stood up slowly, his back to his son, and faced the three employees who had caused this. His gaze was terrifying. It was not the loud, explosive anger of a bully. It was the focused, silent rage of a king whose heir had been harmed. He looked first at Officers Davies and Johnson. "Your names and badge numbers," he said. It wasn't a request. Davies, trembling, recited his information. Johnson followed suit. "You're on leave," James stated simply. "Effective immediately. Your commanding officer will be hearing from my legal team within the hour. Get out of my sight." The two officers, stripped of all their bravado, practically fled the room. James's attention then settled on Karen Miller, who was now visibly shaking, her face a mess of terror and regret. "You," he said, and the single word carried a universe of contempt. "I saw a clip of the video on my way here. I heard you. I saw your face. You look so proud of yourself." "Mr. Vance, I can explain," she whimpered. "I was following protocol. I thought—" "You thought?" James interrupted, taking a step closer. His voice was dangerously low. "You didn't think. You judged. You saw a black child in a hoodie, and you saw a criminal. You didn't see a passenger. You didn't see a teenager. You didn't see a human being. You saw a stereotype that made your decision easy for you. You are the living, breathing embodiment of the cancer that I have spent millions of dollars in corporate training to eradicate. And you have the audacity to wear my company's uniform while you do it. He turned to the ashen-faced VP. Robert, get her out of here. She is to be escorted from the premises. Her employment with Aura Airlines is terminated, effective 10 seconds ago. See to it that her final paycheck is mailed to her. She is never to set foot on Aura property again. Karen let out a choked sob. Please, Mr. Vance, I have a mortgage. 20 years. I've given this company 20 years of my life. James Vance looked at her one last time, his eyes devoid of any pity. And in 20 minutes, you undid 20 years of my work to build this brand's reputation. We're even. He turned his back on her, a final, brutal dismissal. He knelt back down in front of his son, as if the rest of the world and its wreckage no longer existed. He was no longer James Vance, CEO. He was just a father, trying desperately to figure out how to start piecing his son back together. As the disgraced Karen Miller was led away by a stone-faced Robert Paulson, and the frantic whispers of the Port Authority supervisors echoed from down the hall, the small office became a sanctuary of silence. For the first time, James Vance took a full, deep breath, and the weight of what had happened to his son settled on him, not as a corporate crisis, but as a deeply personal failure. He had built an empire in the sky, a brand synonymous with luxury and trust, yet he had failed to create a space where his own child could feel safe. He had equipped Marcus with every advantage, money, education, opportunity, but he had been powerless to protect him from the oldest and ugliest of poisons: prejudice. Let's get you out of here, James said softly, his hand on Marcus's shoulder. Marcus nodded, allowing his father to help him to his feet. As they stepped out of the office, they were met by Captain Eva Rostova. Her uniform was still immaculate, but her face was etched with concern and a quiet fury of her own. She addressed James directly, with no deference to his title, only a shared sense of outrage. Mr. Vance, she said, her voice crisp, I am Captain Rostova. This was my flight. I witnessed what happened, and I want you to know, on behalf of myself and my flight crew, we are appalled. I tried to intervene. They wouldn't listen. James looked at the captain, and for the first time since he'd arrived, a flicker of something other than rage showed in his eyes. Gratitude. Thank you, Captain. Your name has been noted. What you did, what you tried to do, it matters. Your son is a passenger, entitled to dignity and respect, she continued. Then her gaze softened as she looked at Marcus. Young man, I am truly sorry for what you were put through. This is not what Aura Airlines stands for. It's not what I stand for. Marcus mumbled a quiet, thank you, overwhelmed by the whirlwind of events. James's legal team had already arrived, led by Alani Jackson, a formidable black woman who was Aura's chief counsel and one of James's most trusted advisors. She immediately and quietly began taking statements, managing the airport authorities, and insulating Marcus from any further questioning. Her presence was a calming, professional force in the midst of the chaos. They didn't go to another lounge. Instead, Alani led them to a private suite in the airport's executive offices that was reserved for diplomats and heads of state. It was soundproof, secure, and blessedly anonymous. Once inside, Marcus sank onto a sofa, the adrenaline that had been keeping him upright finally draining away, leaving him exhausted and hollow. James sat opposite him, not on the adjacent sofa, but pulling a chair close, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. He took off his suit jacket, loosened his tie. He was shedding the CEO persona, trying to find the father he hadn't been enough of lately. Talk to me, Marcus, he said gently. What do you need? Marcus just stared at his hands at the faint red circles still visible on his wrist. I don't understand, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I didn't do anything. I was just sitting there. Why did she hate me so much? The simple, heartbreaking question struck James harder than any boardroom confrontation ever had. How could he explain the complex, ugly machinery of systemic bias to his son, who had just been chewed up and spat out by it? She didn't hate you, Marcus. She didn't even know you, James tried to explain, the words feeling clumsy and inadequate. She saw a symbol, a stereotype she carries around in her head, and she reacted to that. It had nothing to do with you, and everything to do with her, with a sickness in the world that I hoped wouldn't touch you so directly. You always told me to be polite, to be respectful, to not make waves, Marcus said, looking up, his eyes filled with a new, challenging light. I did all that. I called her ma'am. I kept my voice down. I tried to explain. And they put me in handcuffs. The accusation was unspoken but clear. Your rules don't work, Dad. Your world of order and merit and playing the game right is a lie. James had no defense. You're right, he said, his voice heavy with contrition. You did everything right and the system still failed you, which means I failed you. I am so sorry, Marcus. More than I can ever say. The conversation was stilted, painful. The two of them had a relationship built on scheduled phone calls across time zones and shared holidays. James had provided for his son, but he hadn't prepared him for this. He had built a gilded cage, and Marcus had just learned how fragile its bars truly were. Alani Jackson re-entered the room after a few minutes, her phone pressed to her ear. She held up a finger, finished her call, and turned to James. The video is everywhere, she said bluntly. It's the #1 trending topic on Twitter worldwide. Yours justice for Marcus. The media is already camped out at Aura headquarters. Every major news network has called. They don't know his identity yet, but it's only a matter of time. James nodded grimly. What's the plan for London? The flight is gone, Alani said. We can have the Gulfstream ready to take you and Marcus to London in 90 minutes. Wheels up by 7 p.m. James looked at his son. Marcus's face was pale, his shoulders slumped. The excitement he'd had for the art program, the quiet thrill of his first solo international trip, was gone, replaced by a deep, weary trauma. London wasn't a dream anymore. It was the destination of a nightmare. I don't want to go, Marcus said quietly. James's heart sank. Marcus, the program, this is what you've worked for. I don't care, he replied, shaking his head. I just want to go home. James looked at Alani, who gave a slight, understanding nod. The corporate CEO in him knew this was a logistical problem, a missed opportunity, but the father in him knew it was the only right answer. Okay, James said, his decision instant and absolute. Okay, son, we're going home. He stood up and put his suit jacket back on. The CEO was back, but his mission had changed. This was no longer just about damage control for his company. This was about justice for his son. Alani, he said, his voice now steely and resolved. Cancel the jet to London. I want a press conference set up for tomorrow morning at headquarters. Get the Port Authority commissioner on the phone. Get the mayor's office on the phone. And get me everything, and I mean everything, on Karen Miller and officers Davies and Johnson. Their service records, their commendations, their complaints. Everything. He looked back at Marcus, who was watching him with a new kind of attention. This isn't going to be swept under the rug, James promised, speaking as much to his son as to his chief counsel. This isn't going to be a quiet settlement and a memo about diversity. They wanted a spectacle, so I'm going to give them one. The storm had just begun, but now it would be a storm of his own making. The viral video acted as the lightning strike. What followed was the thunder, and it was deafening. By morning, the story was on every news channel, every website, every social media feed. Sarah, the student journalist who filmed it, was being interviewed on CNN, her shaky phone footage playing on a loop for millions to see. The narrative was powerful and brutally simple. Aura Airlines, a company that sold an image of elite, inclusive service, had allowed its employee to racially profile a teenager, resulting in his public humiliation and wrongful detention. Justice for Marcus was no longer just a hashtag, it was a movement. The clip of Karen Miller's smug face, followed by Marcus's terrified expression as the cuffs were applied, became an instant meme for corporate racism. Aura Airlines' stock, which had been trading at an all-time high, took a nosedive in pre-market trading. The initial drop was 5%. By the time the opening bell rang on Wall Street, it was a full 12%, wiping out over $1 billion of shareholder value in a matter of hours. The karma was swift, digital, and financially devastating. For Karen Miller, the fallout was a personal apocalypse. Her termination was the least of it. Her name, address, and phone number were leaked online by digital vigilantes. Her phone buzzed incessantly with hateful messages and death threats. Reporters camped outside her modest suburban home in Queens. Her picture was everywhere, her face the national symbol of a Karen. Friends stopped answering her calls. Her sister told her not to come to Sunday dinner. The community she had lived in for 20 years suddenly saw her as a monster. In a tearful, panicked interview with a local news station, she tried to defend herself. "I was just doing my job. I was following protocol. We are trained to spot inconsistencies. It had nothing to do with race." But her words were drowned out by the irrefutable evidence of the video. Her protestations of innocence sounded like the desperate lies of a person caught red-handed, and the public's fury only intensified. She was fired, ostracized, and now facing a potential lawsuit that would ruin her financially. The power she had wielded so carelessly at that gate had recoiled and crushed her. The karma for officers Davies and Johnson was more bureaucratic but no less severe. They were suspended without pay. The Port Authority PD, facing a PR cataclysm, threw them under the bus immediately. The police commissioner held a press conference promising a full and transparent investigation, a clear sign that their careers were over. The police union provided them with lawyers but privately told them they were on their own. They had become liabilities, symbols of the exact kind of policing the city was trying to distance itself from. Their dream of a stable career and a comfortable pension evaporated in the heat of a 10-minute incident that was now global news. But the real story, the one that captivated the world, was the identity of Marcus. When Airlines released the statement that the boy in the video was Marcus Vance, the son of their own CEO, the story transformed from a corporate blunder into a Shakespearean drama. James Vance's 10 a.m. press conference was the most watched corporate event of the year. The room at Aura headquarters was packed to the gills with journalists. The air crackled with anticipation. James walked to the podium alone. There were no lawyers, no VPs, no PR handlers. He looked tired but resolute. He didn't start with corporate platitudes. He started as a father. "Yesterday, my son, Marcus, a 17-year-old boy, was on his way to London for the summer art program he had dreamed of," James began, his voice steady but filled with a raw emotion that no one had ever heard from him before. He was excited. He was hopeful. And at our gate, in our terminal, wearing a brand I built from the ground up, my son was racially profiled, falsely accused, and publicly humiliated. He was put in handcuffs for the crime of being a young black man in a first-class seat. He let that sink in. The employee who initiated this has been terminated. The officers involved are being investigated. But this is not about one employee or two officers. This is about a culture of bias that I, as the leader of this company, have clearly failed to address in a meaningful way. Our diversity and inclusion PowerPoints, our unconscious bias seminars, they have been a failure. They are a bandage on a bullet wound, and yesterday, my own son was the one who was shot. He then announced a series of actions that sent shockwaves through the business world. First, he was placing himself on a temporary leave of absence from his CEO duties to focus on his family and on spearheading a new initiative. Second, he was personally funding, with $100 million of his own money, the creation of the Vance Foundation, an organization dedicated to fighting racial injustice and promoting arts education in underserved communities. Third, and most shockingly, he was creating a new independent civilian oversight board for Aura Airlines, with the power to investigate and discipline any employee, from a baggage handler to a senior executive, for acts of discrimination. The board's findings would be made public. "There will be no more hiding behind corporate statements," James declared, his voice ringing with conviction. "We will be transparent, we will be accountable, and we will be better. I will not allow my son's pain to be for nothing." He concluded without taking any questions. The press was stunned into silence. This wasn't damage control, it was a revolution. He had taken the worst day in his company's history and was attempting to turn it into its most defining moment. Later that day, hidden from the media storm at their home in Connecticut, Marcus watched the press conference on a laptop with his father. He saw the power, the conviction, the raw paternal anger. For the first time, he saw the man, not just the CEO. He saw a father willing to set his own empire on fire to make things right for his son. The hard karma had hit Karen Miller and the officers like a tidal wave. But for James Vance, the karma was a different beast entirely. It was the humbling, agonizing realization that he had conquered the world, but had failed to protect his own home. And now he was faced with the monumental task of rebuilding both. In the weeks and months that followed, the story of Marcus Vance became a cultural touchstone, a case study taught in business schools, law schools, and sociology classes. It was a brutal lesson in modern karma, where the court of public opinion, amplified by social media, could deliver a verdict and a sentence before any legal proceedings had even begun. Karen Miller's life was irrevocably shattered. The lawsuit filed by the Vance family wasn't for money. They sought a symbolic $1 in damages, but for a binding admission of wrongdoing. Facing financial ruin from her own legal fees and unemployable in any public-facing role, she was forced to sell her home and move in with her sister in a different state. She became a recluse, haunted by 10 minutes of terrible judgment. The final, bitterest pill of her karma wasn't the public scorn or the financial loss. It was the gnawing, undeniable truth she had to face in her lonely hours. She had been wrong. She had let a lifetime of lazy, unexamined biases lead her to hurt a child, and in doing so, she had destroyed herself. Officers Davies and Johnson were fired from the Port Authority Police Department following the internal investigation. Their union's efforts were half-hearted. The video evidence was too damning. They became pariahs within the law enforcement community, cautionary tales of how not to handle a situation. They too faced civil suits, and their careers in the field they had trained for were over. They were left with nothing but their shame and the infamy of being the cops who handcuffed the wrong kid. But the most profound transformation was happening within Airlines and the Vance family itself. James Vance was true to his word. He stepped back from the day-to-day operations, pouring his formidable energy and intellect into the Vance Foundation and the new Civilian Oversight Board. He hired a team of leading civil rights experts, sociologists, and legal scholars to build the board from the ground up. The board's first public report, released 6 months later, was a brutal, unflinching look at Airlines. It revealed dozens of smaller, previously ignored incidents of bias. It detailed systemic issues in hiring and promotion. It was a corporate self-immolation, a deliberate burning down of the old culture, and it was revolutionary. Other airlines, under immense public pressure, began to follow suit, creating their own oversight committees. The Aura model became the new gold standard for corporate accountability. The change was slow, painful, and expensive, but it was real. The relationship between James and Marcus was also being rebuilt on a new foundation of honesty and vulnerability. The summer was not spent in London, but at home. They talked for hours, not about business or school, but about life, about identity, about the weight of being a black man in America. A conversation James shamefully admitted they should have had years ago. He had given his son every privilege, but had neglected to give him the armor and the wisdom he truly needed. Marcus, for his part, slowly began to heal. He had no interest in becoming a public figure or a symbol. He was still the quiet, observant artist. But his art had changed. He stopped drawing strangers from a distance. His new sketchbook was filled with raw, emotional self-portraits, studies of his own hands, his own face. He started a large-scale charcoal piece, a triptych. The first panel depicted a boy in a hoodie, surrounded by faceless accusers. The second showed the cold, metallic gleam of handcuffs on a young wrist. The third, however, was not one of despair. It showed the same boy standing with his father, the two of them looking out a window, not at an airport, but towards a new, uncertain horizon. It was a piece about trauma, but it was also about resilience in the complex, painful, and ultimately powerful bond of family. A year after the incident, the Slade School of Fine Art, having heard his story, offered Marcus a deferred, fully funded position for the following summer. This time, when James asked how he wanted to get there, Marcus smiled for the first time in a long time. "I'll take Flight 104, he said, seat 2A. When the day came, James didn't just drop him off. He walked with him to the gate. Gate C26. The airline had a new gate agent there, a young black woman who greeted Marcus with a warm, genuine smile. The entire boarding process was different. There was a palpable sense of awareness, of care that hadn't been there before. As Marcus scanned his boarding pass, Captain Eva Rostova stepped out of the jet bridge. She had specifically requested this flight. She smiled at Marcus. "Welcome back, Mr. Vance," she said, her voice warm. "We're honored to have you on board today." Marcus Vance walked onto the plane, no longer just the CEO's son, but a young man who had inadvertently forced an entire industry to look in the mirror. He hadn't asked for the fight, but he had survived it. And in its wake, his father had been transformed, a company had been reborn, and the lives of those who wronged him had been forever altered by the swift, unyielding, and ultimately just hand of karma. He took his seat, opened his sketchbook, and began to draw the view from his window, a world of endless sky and new beginnings. This story isn't just about Marcus Vance. It's a reflection of a reality where prejudice can overshadow truth. It reveals how one person's careless judgment can spark a crisis. But more importantly, it shows the incredible power of accountability. Marcus's father could have quietly settled this and moved on. Instead, he chose the harder path, to dismantle a flawed system and build a better one, all driven by a father's love. This is a powerful reminder that true progress doesn't come from silence, but from demanding change. If Marcus's journey resonated with you, help us share this message by hitting the like button. Join the conversation on corporate justice in the comments below. And to ensure you don't miss more stories like this, please subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. Thank you for listening.